Welcome back, guys. We are here with day 10, and we're going through Genesis chapters 30 through 31. So at this point in the story, Leah has had four sons. Reuben, that's me, just kidding. But his name means he has seen my misery, or behold the son. We have Simeon, which means one who hears, Levi, which means being attached or having an affection for, and Judah, which means praise. So, of course, Leah named all her sons after how God had treated her and helped her through her time of struggling to get affection from Jacob. So now at this point, Rachel thinks that she needs to struggle too. She's getting jealous over her sister Leah popping out babies left and right, and she's been barren. And some would consider her a drama queen when she says, "Give me children or I'll die." But not in this case. We see in the ancient culture that not having kids was literally like death to women. We'll even see later with the Israelites that if someone was barren, it was because of a curse for them being unfaithful to their husband, which we'll see in Numbers chapter 5, verse 27. And so Jacob gets big mad with Rachel because he has nothing to do with whether or not God gives her a child. Although I would say he could be a little more compassionate. Jacob could have prayed for Rachel like his father Isaac did for Rebekah, but instead he follows in his grandfather's footsteps. He even had a similar apathy to Abraham because Abraham was like, "Hey, do with your maidservant what you want to do." And Jacob was like, "Look, this ain't my fault and this ain't my problem." And we see Rachel and Leah making this into a big competition for no reason at all. Rachel gives Bilhah her maidservant as a wife unto Jacob, and she ends up having two sons, very similar to Abraham with his wife Sarah and Hagar. We see the contrast where Leah's sons' names were out of faith versus Rachel being out of jealousy and spite. Imagine your mother naming you Struggle. That must be tough. And of course, Leah joins in with her own maidservant. I know, I know. What is this, a popularity contest? More like a baby contest. Now imagine pimping out your own husband. Yes, I do mean it in that way. It's just she did it for mandrakes, of all things. Honestly, Leah and Rachel were just being too petty for each other. So much so that Leah gets to the delusional point of believing God blessed her with more sons through Zilpah and that he was gracing her and was pleased with this. Oh, the irony. So Leah ended up having 6 sons and 1 daughter. That's all from her own womb. And then 2 sons from Zilpah. She ends up having 8 sons through all of this and 1 daughter, and Jacob still didn't care about her. Now imagine all of the children that got born out of spite for Rachel and Leah's dispute and competition. That must be really sad. In the end, Rachel finally ends up getting pregnant after God remembered her plight. She ended up having Joseph, and his name means may he add. We also see later on that this is the first son that Jacob actually loved, all because he loved Rachel more than he loved Leah. Honestly, the whole competition didn't make any sense because Rachel was loved by Jacob regardless if she had children or not. We see later on that Jacob grows in immense wealth. So Jacob is ready to go back home at this point to return to the land that his father had born him. And as we all know, Laban wasn't very happy about that. He was ready to give him his wages, but really was hoping that he would stay a little longer. We see this same greed as he did when Rebekah first got taken away by Isaac's servant. And by asking Jacob for his wages, we see that he was being all sneak like. Jacob ends up asking for the speckled, spotted, and streaked goats and sheep while also having the black sheep. And Laban was like, "Bet, I'll give that to you." And Laban ends up hiding those same type of goats and sheep away from Jacob for 3 days with his sons. And so Jacob, being the smart, clever guy he is, decided to play the game with Laban. So he took fresh branches of poplar, almond, and plane trees, and he took off the bark where white streaks are made on the branches, and he put the peeled branches next to the watering trough where the goats and sheep mate. And so with that, the goats ended up coming out with spots, streaks, and speckles, just as Jacob had predicted. And he took the lambs that were born from these sheep and goats. And so whenever the stronger females were going to the watering trough, that is when he would put the branches next to them so that he would have the stronger females mate with his goats and then the weaker ones would be mating with Laban's goats. You can't out-trick the trickster. Jacob ended up getting the bag in unethical ways, but he still got the bag. Now we're in chapter 31 where he decides to dip, but in a very, very quiet manner. It's even more ironic at the fact that Laban's sons are speaking negatively about Jacob and how he deceived their father, yet the father was the first one to get it started. So even Laban was acting all fishy. This is when God told Jacob, just go back home. And Jacob was like, bet. So Jacob tells Leah and Rachel about the plot about leaving their father because he's being all snake-like, and that he kept on changing his wages, even 10 times, to where, oh yeah, now you can have the speckled goats only. Oh, but now you can only have the streaked goats. And now you can only have the spotted goats. And each and every single time he stated that, God had set up to where the goats that were coming out were only those specific type. So we see that God kept Jacob, even when Laban tried to use it against him. We see that God prospered Jacob despite Laban's duplicity. Jacob even shares a little dream with Rachel and Leah on how God blessed him. And we see that Leah and Rachel are some ride or die chicks for real. They told Jacob, look, we already seen that our father wasted the money that you gave to him for us. And so we know that whatever it is that you do, God is blessing it. And that whatever it is that you have will be ours as well. And Jacob even asked him because he wanted to make sure he has a willing family that is ready to go back home. And so they dipped secretly and taking everything they owned. And Jacob just didn't want problems with Laban. And of course, Rachel decided to steal some idols. She possibly was trying to regain some assets from Laban, the ones that he squandered. Or because she worshipped idols too. Idols mean a family inheritance in this time. But nonetheless, these idols ended up bringing destruction upon Rachel and her family with Jacob. So we see that Laban is heated and he just goes and chases Jacob for 7 days. But of course, the day before he met up with Jacob, God had told him in a dream, chill, bro. If you do something, I might have to get ugly. And we see that Laban is actually really sad about not being able to say bye to his grandchildren and his daughters. He's even more angry that his gods got took from him. Jacob even admits that he was scared of losing his wives if he had told Laban, hey, I want to go back home. This is where Jacob even puts a curse upon the person that had stolen any of his idols away from him, because he truly believed that Rachel did not take them. And he says, let the person that stole your gods die. That's why the Bible says life and death is in the power of the tongue. And so we have to be careful with what we say. So Laban went rummaging through all the tents that Jacob's wives lived in. It got to the point where Rachel was so desperate that she sat on the idols and said to her father, hey, I'm not getting up because I'm on my period. And of course, he would have never thought that she would be sitting on a bunch of idols if she was on her period to desecrate them. This is where we see Jacob just goes off on Laban. He said, I worked tirelessly for 20 years. I cared for the flocks. I even paid for the stolen animals. And I took the burden of loss when wild animals came to eat your flock. So we see at this point, Laban was like, I bet. Let's figure out a way to stop all this hostility. So Laban and Jacob ended up making a treaty. Jacob had told him and his family to set up a bunch of stones that would be a monument to commemorate this treaty and covenant. This is where Jacob ends up naming that place where they made the covenant Gilead, which means witness pile. We even see Laban acknowledge God and that he sees all sins even if someone else doesn't. God ends up being the witness of this covenant that no harm between each party would ever happen to each other, and no one will cross the monument. We also see this is a time where God is called fearsome twice by Jacob. And so they ended up having a covenant feast on the mountain and went their separate ways. Laban kissed his grandchildren and his daughters, and he went on his own way. And so that's the story of Genesis 30 through 31. I hope y'all enjoyed it, and I can't wait to keep making more. God bless.